everybody, it's Rebecca, and it's time for my March wrap-up. So it's already the end of March. That's insane. I can't believe it. I don't know what's going on. This year is going crazy. We're all at home now too because of this pandemic. So yeah, lots of reading. I read 12 things in March, guys. 12. Woo, did you hear the crack? Did you hear it? I heard it. It was bad. Anyway, so yeah, last month I read 11, and then this month, March, whatever, I read 12. I had a range of reads everywhere from a 2-star to a 4.5 star. No 5 stars this month, but a couple that were really close, and then a couple that were not close at all, like at all. One of them was audio, one of them was a physical book, and the rest of them were all ebooks. Basically, I have this thing where I just get books from the library on my Kindle, and then they're all due back and have people waiting, and so I have to read them really fast if I want to read them because they all have like ginormous holds, and I've been waiting to get them for like 8 weeks, and then I get them all at once, and then I'm like, I have to read all of them because I'm gonna lose them and I won't get them for another like 3 months. So that's what happened, and that's why I read 12 things. And that's why they're also, it's a very weird, it's an eclectic mix. Let's just get into them now, why don't we? So as usual, I'm gonna do them in the order in which I read them so that you don't know if I liked it or not as we get into it. Unless you've looked at my Goodreads, in which case, phooey. Just kidding. So the first book I read this month, I actually started it last month, but it was an audiobook and I ended up finishing it this month, and it was Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness. This was my audio, my memoir. I started another audiobook but haven't finished it yet, so you'll see that one whenever I finish it. But this one was the one audiobook I did finish. It was Over the Top, Jonathan Van Ness, who we know from Queer Eye, and it's his story of growing up and also like all sorts of struggles that he went through as he was coming of age and going through things. And yeah, for watching the show, you just think he's this like bright, bubbly personality. There's a lot of dark history there. So trigger warnings for sexual abuse and for drugs and things like that. I was very surprised, but seeing him now and how well he's done since that and coming to terms with a lot of these things, a lot of his demons, was really inspiring, and I really enjoyed it. And I was able to respect him even more than I already did. So if you like Queer Eye, or if you like those themes, then definitely check it out. I gave it a 4. Next up, I read The Border by Steve Schafer, which if you've been watching, you know I have this like big cultural identity thing. I really like reading books about cultural identity and from different cultures and immigrants and refugees. I teach a unit on that, so I try to read as much of it as I can to influence my students, who I will not see again. So I read The Border, and it's about 3 boys and a girl in Mexico, and they're at a party, and then they leave for a minute, and then while they're gone, like everyone there at their party, like all of their families are murdered. This happens in the first chapter, so it's not really a spoiler. And then they have to flee because the people who killed them are going to be after them too. So they're trying to flee Mexico and cross the border into the United States. I was like, this is an awesome concept. I love this. It deals with a lot of these immigration issues we've been talking about. However, I was not a fan of the writing, like at all. Like I was skimming. I just wanted to finish it, but I didn't care. I felt like the characters weren't really developed that well. There was some like insta-love happening that like I just didn't buy. I didn't buy a lot of the things that were happening, essentially. And I wanted to love it because I wanted to love this story of immigrants illegally crossing the border, but unfortunately the writing just completely took me out of that. However, I do think that it is a high interest, low reader type book, so teens would really get into it, I feel like, because it's like one action moment following the next, and it's not like a ton of like slow character development, which is more what I really like. So I could see some of my students like loving this book, just kind of like the same way they really love the like Furnace books, but this one, it just wasn't for me. So I only gave it a 2. So next up were my 2 4.5 books, which were my highest 2 books for the entire month. They're both adult. They're both by like beloved authors, essentially. So one of them, the first one, which was my personal favorite of the month, was The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. I was on a big Ann Patchett kick like 2 years ago. I think while I was pregnant in like spring break, I think I read her first books. That was, yeah, 2 years ago at this point. And I just fell in love with her writing, and so this was her newest book. It's called The Dutch House. It takes place over a number of years, and it follows a brother and sister as they're growing up, and they live in this like really elaborate house, and their stepmother kicks them out, and then it kind of goes back and forth in time of them going from this like rich lifestyle to having to kind of go back to being poor and dealing with that. And so it jumps back in time between past and like different pieces of the future of them coming back and looking at the Dutch house and talking about it, and then different memories, and then it kind of goes through their lives. I just really loved the development, the characters, this kind of like story that centered on this like weird house, but it wasn't the house. Like it was just, I don't know, I really like the dynamics, I think, and like this story of growing up and holding on to things from youth for so long that really are impacting you in a negative way that you need to just learn to let go of. And I think I just really related to that, and I really enjoyed it. So I gave it a 4.5. The other 4.5 star rating was Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, who wrote Underground Railroad, which is on my TBR, and I didn't want to read it. I've been wanting to read it, but I haven't wanted to read it because my own novel is a futuristic Underground Railroad, so I didn't want to get like too wrapped up in that. So it's on my like, I will read this later book. But anyway, so Colson Whitehead, he is a predominant author. He writes African-American Black stories. And so this is no different. It takes place in the South, in Florida in the 1960s, I believe. So it's civil rights. And this is based on a real place. So these boys got sent to this like, it's a prison, but it's like a school. It's called the Nickel School for like troubled youth or something like that. The story focuses on this one black boy who is really smart, wrong place, wrong time, gets sent to this like prison, and kind of like his experiences through that. And it also is one of those ones that jumps back and forth in time. So it has the present day, and then it also has the past of like what happened at that school. And there's some like dark stuff that happens there. It's not a pretty history that I didn't know anything about that. And so I thought that was really interesting. I think it could have dived a little bit deeper into some of the elements of that, which is why I gave it a 4.5, but overall I really liked it. And it was tough to read, but in a good way. Next, I read All Eyes on Us by Kit Frick, which is a mystery. It's a teen mystery. These two girls, it jumps back and forth between points of view, and they're both receiving messages from this like anonymous person threatening them and telling them that they need to break up with their boyfriend. Well, one of them's boyfriend and the other one's like fake boyfriend. You have to read it to kind of understand that. So I liked it. It wasn't amazing. I thought the ending it had a good twist. I wasn't expecting that, but it just didn't completely sell me, so I gave it a 3.5. Following that, I read A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. So this is about a girl from Palestine who emigrates to America. She gets married to a guy that lives in America, and so she follows his family back to America and lives with them in Brooklyn. And it's her kind of coming to terms with what it means to be a woman and how she doesn't appreciate what that means and like what is expected of her, and like also her struggle with leaving everyone and everything she knows behind to come to this family that she doesn't know, into this country she doesn't know, and then being forced into this role she doesn't want. And I thought that was a really beautiful idea. I just felt that writing was really weak in a lot of areas because it was so repetitive. This is another one that had multiple perspectives from the past and the present or the future. And so again, I liked that. I liked the different voices, but I just felt that it was very redundant with its writing. And so that really pulled me out of it in a lot of ways. And so I did only give it a 3, but I did relate to it in a lot of ways about what it means to be a woman. It hit hard in a lot of ways, I will say that. Next up, I read Internment by Samira Ahmed, which is a dystopian. It's kind of an alternate reality. It's like if the Muslim ban had become more than it did, where Muslim Americans were actually sent to internment camps, just like the Japanese Americans were during World War II. And so it's the same idea. It's even set in like a very similar place, like a mile or two down the road. And it's dealing with this one girl and like her story and why she's there and how she doesn't appreciate it and how she wants to rebel. But again, I found parts of it to be just unbelievable that this teenage girl would have this much say and that these guards would be that like welcoming and like helpful. I didn't buy it, and I wanted it to be a lot darker, I think, than it really was. And so I only gave it a 3. unfortunately. Next up, I read Euphoria by Lily King, which is about some anthropologists in New Guinea in the like 1920s and following different tribes, and they're living with the tribes. So it's a woman and two men. So one of them is her husband, and then one of them is like a fellow anthropologist on the same river. It's based on Margaret Mead, but in very loosely in the fact that she was like married to a fellow anthropologist and then ended up like leaving him for a British anthropologist. And so it's got all of the characters, but the situations are different. So it's based on it very, very, very loosely. It's like takes the idea and then just branches off. It's kind of got split perspectives between the Margaret Mead character and the British guy. I just found it really interesting. It reminded me a lot of ways of State of Wonder by Anne Patchett, but it's like, you know, in the jungle with these like tribes with like weird traditions and like trying to get to know them and also trying to figure out who you are in the middle of that. And it was fun. I liked it. I gave it a 4. Next up, I read The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C., which follows the story of a Hanyo, or a woman diver, in Jeju, Korea, which is like an island south of Korea. It's a historical fiction. It's based on historical events. It's based on like real people, real women divers. And they are free divers. So they just like dive down, grab things, bring them up and whatnot. And it just follows her journey, her life. Basically, again, it deals with past and present. So we have what's going on with her now, or like in the late 2000s, and then what happens and like what like her past and like what led her up to that. And it's ultimately the story of friendship as well between herself and another diver, and kind of how their paths depart, how they are different people and complement each other. But it also deals with the history of Korea and the history of Jeju and that island and the people. And so it talks about like these different rebellions and revolutions and the Korean War and kind of how that impacted everybody. And I didn't know any of this, so it was very enlightening. It was also really, really, really hard to read at times because there are instances of violence and violence on children and women, and that was really tough for me since I do have a 1-year-old, and like reading it I had a hard time. But I did appreciate it, and like you can't shy away from the horrors of the past, unfortunately, and it's best to learn from them. And so I found this really, really, really intriguing. So I only gave it a 4 just because parts of it were very tough and a lot of it again was just very dense, but I did really enjoy it, so I did give it a 4. And I also recommend anyone to read it because it was very enlightening, and I learned about a completely new set of like strong, powerful women who were providing for their families on this island where like the gender roles were flipped in a way, and I found that really intriguing. So I really enjoyed it, but it is heavy. It's very heavy at times. Following that, I got Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid from the library, which is another one that I had like long holds on. So was The Island of Sea Women. But Such a Fun Age was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, which is why it was like a really long wait. And I finally got it, so I had to read it. And it's the story of two women. One of them is a like 30-something mother. The other one is a 20-something babysitter. And it deals with issues of race. So the babysitter is called at like 11 o'clock. This is the first chapter. 11 o'clock at night. She's like out with her friends, and this woman calls her and she's like, hey, can you come please grab the girl my daughter, you babysit for her, can you take her out? There's like police coming and we don't want her here. And she's like, yeah. So she takes her to the grocery store where she's accused of kidnapping her. And kind of, it deals with the fallout of those events, both like in a public setting, but also just privately with like, it's a coming of age story for the babysitter character. And it's also kind of dealing with these like issues of like race and racial relations and what that means. And like, I just found it really intriguing. I also really loved the daughter character who's 3 and her name is Briar. And like, I just saw my own daughter in her a lot of ways. And so I really liked that part of it. I didn't love the book, but I did like it. So I gave it a 4. All right. My battery died and I had to like charge it. And now I'm back after like 15 minutes. So if things are different, that's why. So the last 2 things I read, the next one was Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. I read Final Girls a few years ago by him and I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but this one was chosen for the Pop Sugar Teachergram Challenge for this month. And so I picked it up and I read it. I got it with like a book of the month credit anyway. Basically, there's this like weird apartment building in Manhattan that it's not real. but in the book world, the world of the book. And it's like really prestigious, and like it's in books, and like a teen romance novel that takes place there. So a lot of people are kind of like intrigued by it, including our main character, who is down on her luck. And so she's just been like on the struggle bus basically for years because of all of these things that have happened. And she's broke and she's having a hard time, like lots of things. Anyway, so she sees an ad on Craigslist that's like, hey, we need an apartment sitter. Finds out it's at this apartment building and is like, I love it. I want to live here. This is beautiful. The pay is great. All I have to do is stay at the apartment. Done. But there's some shady things, like she can't spend the night anywhere else. She can't have anybody come visit her. So lots of creepy likeness. She can't talk to any of the residents who live there. And it just seems like too good to be true. And so it's kind of her story of living there, and like some weird things start happening. Some people go missing and she's trying to uncover it and uncover the secrets and what's really happening. So I was not calling the twist. Like I didn't call the twist at all. It felt a little far-fetched too, but I liked it. It was fun. So I gave it a 3.5. I liked it more than Final Girls though. So, and it was not super duper scary. I'm not a big fan of like scary books, and this had a couple moments of like scary thriller-esque, but mostly it was just kind of like tension, more of a mystery, like intrigue, than it was like who's like something coming after you, trying to kill you kind of thing. So if you're not a fan of horror, you'll be okay, because I'm not a fan of horror and I never went to bed like scared. It's manageable. And finally, the last book that I read this month was Loveboat Taipei by Abigail Hing, and this is the story of a girl. She has just graduated and she's trying to determine what she wants to do with her life. Her parents are Chinese and they've immigrated to America, and so she's dealing with that cultural identity, which again, we know that I love. And so she's trying to figure out if she wants to dance. That's her favorite thing. That's like her love of her life. But her parents really want her to go to medical school, and so she's trying to determine what she's going to do with her future. Does she follow her parents' wishes or does she follow her own dreams? And in the middle of this, her parents send her to Taiwan for the summer to this like camp essentially for Asian Americans to like interact with other people, like other Asian Americans from all over, and to like learn Mandarin and other aspects of Chinese culture. But they also call it Loveboat because it's like everybody gets like hooked up while they're there. It's like an ulterior motive is to like find your match. And so it's a romance, but it's also a coming of age, cultural identity. It hits a lot of my like favorite things. I was not the biggest fan. I just felt like she rushed into things with people, and parts of it were just like, I didn't really buy it. I just didn't buy it, a lot of it. This month was just me not buying a lot of what I read, and like a lot of the character choices. I was like, this seems like it's completely out of character. And also I was just like, it dragged on really long. So while I liked it in some regards, I didn't like all of it, and so I only gave it a 3. Well, that is it for my March wrap up. I hope you're all enjoying your quarantine as much as you can enjoy quarantine. If you are quarantined, let me know in the comments below like what you're doing, what you're reading, what you're watching. I'm watching Top Chef. I stopped watching like after season 12, so I'm catching up. That's what I'm doing, and I'm hanging out with my kid because she's 1 and I can't send her to daycare, and I don't want to send her to daycare right now, so that's what we're doing. I'm also like teaching online. It's good times. What are you doing? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me what you're reading. Tell me all the things. And I guess that's it for me today, guys. I'll see you next time.